We're delighted to be here today. Lovely to see everybody. Thanks to everybody, including the team at Dublin Business School and fellow former colleagues, for the very nice things that have been said about myself and Jane today. Straight back at all of you, and we really admire what you're all doing. So we're delighted to be here today. So we'll get started. Jane and I want to talk about Diamond Open Access Publishing, which is free to publish in and free to read. It's very hard because I see Steve Gianni from EBSCO, the lovely Steve, just in sight there, and I don't want to sound like we're coming at all commercial companies. When Jane and I were in Dublin Business School, we were early adopters of EBSCO products. We also use them in the Institute of Art and Design where we are now, and they're a great company, and I mean that genuinely in the way that Dave also said as well. They're a great company to deal with. So, we want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Ultimately, the aim of knowledge is to benefit society and to transform society, health, education, all these wonderful areas, climate, economic growth. And there was a United Nations conference in New York in 2023 with the theme of open science. And this will have more significance as we go along, because the keynote for this we were very fortunate to get as a result of being involved with Irish Open Access Publishers. We actually had the keynote at this event, at a recent event that we conducted. There's a great summary of that conference in University World News, and there's some lovely quotes in the article. And it says, it seems that misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation on scientific advances are freely available online to all, while credible and authoritative scientific information lies behind paywalls. This is even in spite of the advancement of open science. And you can see there, this is Dr. Ariana Garcia there, who was the keynote at that speaker and who we had speaking for us at a recent Irish Open Access Publishers event. And she is a real proponent of true open access, not gold open access. All the glitters is not gold. And she, again, in the piece it says here, we have to be intentional. And we as librarians know how to be intentional and get things done in creating a system-wide shift to bibliodiversity, inclusiveness, multilingualism. We've got to get better at communicating science, building partnerships, and pursuing a science that is of social relevance to us all. And we actually took this, Jane and I, from the keynote. The actual speeches are freely available on YouTube, and it's a wonderful chart that Dr. Garcia has. She's the executive director of Redalica, which is a huge infrastructure for supporting Diamond Open Access Publishing in South America. They deal with about 1,200 publishers who are Diamond OA publishers, so she really walks the talk. And you can see, she says, science has got to be a global public good, and it shouldn't have APCs, and it should be based on, I can never say this word, so bear with me. Jane has to suffer through all my mispronunciations. Epistemic justice, there we go. Participation, multilingualism, responsible research, assessment, equity, inclusion, bibliodiversity. I personally feel we should all have that pictorial on our office wall just to remind us, because I think this is very aligned to the values of librarianship. But there's a new crisis in town. And I was reading an article recently written by a librarian towards the end of her career, who observed that there are some library graduates who have never operated in librarianship outside of the serious crisis. Just get your head around that. They have never known anything but hyperinflation. And we know what that's like. Anybody who deals with, the finances of running a library knows the cost, as Dave mentioned in his presentation. But we have a new crisis, and the new crisis is gold open access publishing, where you actually have to pay a publisher anything up to 12,000 euros to have your article available on open access. This is a great article by Senku 2019 in Library Quarterly. And they talk about basically hyperinflation, article processing charges, and the hyperinflation. And it's got a great chart in it, and the black line there is the cost of APCs relative to the cost of inflation, which in itself is quite high. And so this is a new crisis that we're dealing with. So how do we achieve the public good if we've got to pay all this money to make scientific information available? So Jane and I published an article with Dr. LAI, who is an incredible OA advocate. I'm sure many of you have heard her speak at various conferences. And we published this in UK SG Insights. It's called Open Access at a Crossroads. We need more bibliodiversity. We can't have all of the knowledge behind paywalls and in the ownership and the hands of vendors. We need to have a range of options. And this is a quote, from the paper. Bibliodiversity, it calls for an inclusive and diverse scholarly communication landscape. The predominance of a few commercial publishers and the gold open access model is diametrically opposed to bibliodiversity and counters the core values of the open access movement. And now a shout out for library publishers, because I think we are ideally poised, referencing Dave's slide there about the skill set that we have. And Jane and I have been engaged in publishing journals, working with faculty, getting platforms, etc., getting involved in the editorial processes. Library publishers are more likely to take on controversial topics and perspectives, as well as emerging scholars who can be sidelined. And we are more inclusive when it comes to ethnicity, race, gender, identity, sex, and country of origin. Now, library publishers publish lots of mainstream journals, but the door is open for diversity and inclusion. We will give a start to young academics who haven't yet published and who may have something very important to say. So the Library Publishing Coalition, if you're interested in getting involved in library publishing, and it's thrilling to hear Laura's talk about, setting up a Diamond Open Access Journal and this open access network. This is the definition from the Library Publishing Coalition, and it defines library publishing as a set of activities led by college and university libraries to support the creation, dissemination, and curation of scholarly, creative, and/or educational works. And it says that it's distinguished by a preference for open access and experimental forms of scholarly communication. And by the way, the Library Publishing Coalition will in time change that definition, because public libraries are now publishing monographs and journals and as we can see with Laura, HSC, etc. This has been recently published by the Library Publishing Coalition, and it's an ethical framework for library publishing. I was so happy about this slide when Dave came out to do his dry run, because I just felt it was such a great sort of example. I mean, he's really shown the lack of ethics, the murkiness that can take place in the scholarly communication landscape. And that's a great thing about library publishing. It's scholarly publication with librarians at the back of it. And this says that this is a guideline if you're going to publish an OA monograph or a library published journal, that you develop your understanding of systems of oppression. You support publications in niche and emerging areas. You implement open access at every ethical opportunity, eliminating costs. Pursue collaborations and strategically to broaden your capacity. And that's why it's lovely to hear Laura talking about all these groups coming together to build this open access culture. This is the Forest Framework for Values-Driven Scholarly Communication, and this is kind of our roadmap for anything we publish as library publishers, that that we are sustainable. You can actually publish journals very, very cheaply, but you want to make sure you can keep doing it every year, whatever funding you have. You're open, you have proper governance, your peer review processes, all of that, equity, anti-impression, sharing of knowledge, and transparency. So what do you do as a library publisher? Well, I'll give you an example. When we were at Dublin Business School, we noticed that a lot of publications were coming out of the School of Humanities and Arts, which you'd expect, and not as much in the business school. So we decided to set up an open access Diamond Journal, and we worked with faculty of all levels, very experienced faculty, junior faculty, etc., and also students. We got an advisory board with the people who had published 60 books. You know, Professor Patrick Flood in DCU, Jane will tell you more about it. And these are the kind of things we then helped with. You know, the hosting of the journal on a platform. We got OJS from Simon Fraser University, onboarding of journal staff, you know, that they know how to use platforms, peer review processes. We use double blind, though there is open peer review now. We made sure all articles had Creative Commons licenses, which Dave mentioned there, metadata creation. Disseminating and promoting is something we're really good at. Once we had that journal, getting those articles out there. And of course, preservation. We use the LOCKSS preservation system, which is available in the OJS publishing platform. So I'm going to hand you over to Jane, who's going to tell you about some of the publishing projects that we've done.
So I'm going to talk about how Marie and I got involved in library publishing and how things have progressed from there. So this is Studies in Arts and Humanities Journal. It was established in 2014 by a team at Dublin Business School, and it is a diamond open access, peer-reviewed, cross-institutional library published journal that published at that time 2 issues per year. And the journal had both an editorial board and an advisory board, and we made some really good contacts with experienced journal editors through this journal. This is an issue that I edited on traveller ethnicity, and it was in 2017 when Enda Kenny granted ethnic recognition to the Irish travellers. And this is Martin Collins of Pave Point at the launch of the issue in the Mansion House, speaking of how important that recognition is to Irish travellers. And I think that this issue kind of underlines what Marie was saying about the importance of library publishing to bibliodiversity. So in 2017, we established, as Marie said, the DBS Business Review. It again is a diamond open access academic peer-reviewed journal, and we signed up to Crossref for DOI, so everything is best practice and quality. OJS, we ran the workflow through that platform. We signed up to the Committee of Publication Ethics, COPE, LOCKSS, Marie mentioned, so lots of copies, keep stuff safe for preservation. DOAJ for discoverability, and also to EBSCO and ProQuest databases for discoverability. So for me, the next step was education, and the Library Publishing Coalition in the States put out a call to see if anybody would like to work through their new library publishing curriculum synchronously, over 16 weeks. So I put my hand up and I did that. So there's 4 modules. We worked our way through them. The teaching was done by people who had created the modules and by experts in the area. Sorry. So the modules are content, impact, sustainability and policies, and it gave a really good foundation to the whole area of kind of quality library publishing. So it was through this, when I was working through this, that Melanie Schlosser, who is one of the leads of the Library Publishing Coalition, asked any of the European people who are on the course if they'd like to host an event, on library publishing in Europe. So I put up my hand for DBS, and the first IFLA Library Publishing Special Interest Group, it's a bit of a mouthful, SIG, midterm meeting came to Dublin. So this is our programme page, and this is the Library Publishing SIG's page on IFLA. So, so what are the activities of the IFLA Publishing SIG? We hold professional development events. We hold regular satellite events. We hold open sessions at the World Library and Information Congress every year. We work with the Library Publishing Coalition on the Library Publishing Directory, and that feeds into our own IFLA Global Library Publishing Map. We have a blog series we post every month. We have a listserv, so please do sign up. And we have a Twitter page. So, so this is our most recent blog post. It's by Marcus Putnings, and he's a senior librarian at the University of Erlangen in Nuremberg. And we'll have another next month, this month, the end of this month. So after the Dublin midterm meeting, we held a midterm meeting in Oslo in 2020, an open session at the virtual World Congress and World Library and Information Congress, or WILIC, which doesn't roll off the tongue. That was in 21. In 2022, we had an open session at WILIC in Dublin that I think probably many of you attended, that WILIC. We had a one-day open programme in The Hague and an open session at WILIC in Rotterdam last year. And the papers from the last two events will be published early next month in an issue of 027.7 Journal, which is a library published journal that issues out of Basel in Switzerland. So now we have a call for papers out for the IFLA Division D midterm meeting, and that's going to be held in Istanbul in June, and we would love people to submit papers. The theme is Libraries Bridging Boundaries, the Challenges and Opportunities for Global Openness. So we would love to get papers on any aspect of openness. It doesn't have to be diamond open access, it could be anything else. So please get in touch. So after the Dublin midterm meeting, the next thing that Marie and I went about was setting up the LAI's Library Publishing Group. So what do we do in the Library Publishing Group? We try to raise awareness of the library publishing movement in Ireland, to disseminate information on the latest developments within the library publishing sector nationally and internationally, to mentor new publishers. And the first thing that we did as a group was all together we worked our way through the modules of the library publishing curriculum. We also established strategic affiliations with the Library Publishing Coalition in the States, and also with the IFLA Library Publishing SIG. I think we're going to go over a little bit. This is just a flavour of the membership of our group, and just to say that some people are publishing a lot of journals. For example, TU Dublin is publishing 14, Maynooth University is publishing 4, and DBS is publishing a journal as well, and obviously Laura's about to publish one. In IADT we're about to hopefully soon publish one ourselves. So these are a few of the events that we've organised. We've had a few over the last 6 months. Most recently, we had a case studies in library publishing, and our keynote was Kate Petterbridge from White Rose Press. We've only got 5 minutes. The next thing we went about doing was to try and educate the next generation of librarians with the library publishing skill set. So we embedded the library publishing curriculum on the open librarianship module of the MSc in Information and Library Management at Dublin Business School, and I taught it there for the next few years. And this is a testimonial by one of the students, Colin Priestley, who works in TCU Library. And he said that the library publishing aspect of the programme was particularly enjoyable. It showed me a new and developing skill set for librarians, while highlighting the international library publishing community as a whole. So how do I go back? There we are. So the next thing that we did is we set up the IOAP. So while we're both very passionate about library publishing, we're also very passionate about the whole area of diamond open access. And so we've set up this community of practice, and so it's to engage not just librarians but also academics and other stakeholders. And we have a really impressive advisory board. So Jan-Erik Fransvag is leading up the DIMAS project. Sam Moore is from Cambridge University. Kevin Stranack is from PKP, and we have Graham Stone from JISC. Our own Jane Burns is on it, and Ariana Becerril Garcia is on it as well. So here are just a few of we've had a big flurry of events over the last month or so, and so we had, hopefully some of you attended. The recordings are all available, but the most recent was just last week, and that was the Irish Open Access Publishers first conference, and our awards. So what impact are we having? So our impact is that we've endorsed Science Europe's Diamond OA Action Plan. We're partners in a number of NORF-funded projects, including Laura's Health Libraries Ireland project, Publish OA, which is the Open Access Transition Programme, and that's been run out of the Royal Irish Academy and Trinity, Fostering Rights Retention, which has been run out of DCU, and Fostering a Culture of Open Research in the Humanities and Social Sciences, and that is being spearheaded by Professor LAI in UCD. And also we've held our conference and Diamond OA Publishing Awards. And this is just the Library Publishing Directory and the IFLA Global Library Publishing Map. There is a call out at the moment so for libraries to fill out the survey to get included in the directory and on the map, and that is open until the end of the month. We'd really recommend, if you're publishing on a repository or anything, please do get involved there.
We're going to be 5 minutes over at least, so please do bear with us. Could I also just give a shout, sorry, I'm always like an Oscar speech, to Maria Rogers, who's also here, who also did a lot of work on the library course as well. So just, she caught my eye there, and just to give her a lot of work she did, and a shout out to her as well. So this was actually a keynote at the World Library Congress in the IFLA Library Publishing SIG's open session. And it was fascinating because Akalo Forwarder, he actually had this SWOT analysis of library publishing. And we know here nationally in Ireland, Jane and I, we have the Library Publishing Group now, we have the IOAP, there is a national community of practice. Library publishing, as you can see from the map that Jane showed, is growing around the world. But it's good juncture to sort of, his talk was very important in terms of standing back. And so our strengths are our Diamond OA. There's lots of opportunities around open science and collaboration and shared infrastructure. One of the NORF projects that we're partnering with in the IOAP is the possible creation of a national OA publishing platform. So lots of opportunities. What are the threats and weaknesses? Well, sometimes library publishing, can we be seen as the poor cousin? I think librarians, we are used to that sensation at times, but we won't let that keep us down. Some library published journals are of such a high standard now, they're being kind of approached by commercial publishers, which we avoid at all costs. And then capacity. Often we are doing this alongside our day jobs. Jane and I are about to set up an IADT journal, and this is something we will be doing along with our day jobs. But you can scale up open library publishing. There's lots of communities of practice where we share knowledge. You can do the library publishing curriculum. We share publishing infrastructure. We have the NORF policy now, etc. And there's a lot you can do to grow it. And just to give you an example of what it can look like, and by the way, one journal can have a lot of impact. Jane and I have been involved in a small number of journals, and we're really trying to spread the word about this area of librarianship. But this is an example of a very evolved program. This is the University of Alberta. They publish 60 journals. They publish OA textbooks. They publish OERs, all of which Dave mentioned. They have a head of open publishing. It is now routine across American universities and in Canadian university libraries to see a head of open publishing. I would love to see a head of open publishing in every library that can afford to have a head of open publishing, particularly the larger libraries. And that's Sonia Betts, who is the head of open publishing there. Examples of journals that they publish: there's the Canadian Journal of Emergency Nursing. You can see it's published in both languages. There's the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development. These are highly consulted and impactful academic journals, free to publish in, free to read. But going back to Sonia Betts, the Library Publishing Coalition has a virtual event every year. I highly recommend it. And Sonia had this slide which caught my eye. And as Martin mentioned, I love a mystery. And I saw 825 journals in Canada. She said there is a near absence of commercial publishers, in quite a large number of journals in Canada. And so I was intrigued by this, and I went and looked at the studies that she mentions in her presentation, and you can see that institutional publishing in Canada and the US is thriving. Academic institutions and associations are starting to take back their journals and publish their own journals. And that's a study there. It's included in the bibliography. What was more interesting in the same study is you can see there that Taylor and Francis and Elsevier are a mere dot. 0.6%, 1.4%. And it's all associations and so forth that are publishing these academic journals. This was another study that Sonia mentioned. It looks at, and again, it's in the slides at the end, what are the characteristics of Canadian independent journals? This is 425 academic journals, all free to publish and free to read. They're all affiliated with not affiliated with commercial publishers, no APCs, smaller editorial teams, and a lot of collaboration, which is something we're trying to foster here in Ireland. So please, if you are interested in library publishing, please do sign up to the IFLA SIG or join us in the Library Publishing Group of the Library Association of Ireland. So there's a quote in the article that we wrote with LAI, and it's scaling small. You don't have to publish 60 journals. You can publish one journal in the way Laura's looking at a journal at the moment, and it can make a real difference. But just to show you what it can look like. And library publishing is becoming so successful that some of them are actually merging with the university presses, and they're handling the OA side. This is happening in Michigan now. In Africa, the University of Cape Town Library has just launched a national publishing platform. It's library-driven, library-managed, and now African scholars continent-wide are publishing on this single platform, and this is all library-driven publishing. This is Reggie Raju, an article that he wrote about the social justice aspect of that suddenly African scholars who can't afford the APCs are getting to publish their research. And he says, we need more local and decolonized content. We need greater opportunities for African authors. And this is a library publishing initiative and a library-driven initiative. So we know librarians can move mountains and that we can do things at this scale, and it's really impressive. And Jane mentioned the curriculum that you can do and that we've embedded for library students. But now library publishing programs are embedding academic journals in master's programs and undergraduate programs. So maybe you do a master's in business studies and there is a journal output for that master's program, and instead of doing a thesis, you're writing an academic article and you produce a journal as a master's program every year. And this is actually written by Kevin Stranick, who's involved in PKP and is a real advocate of OA publishing. And he says, what better way for students to learn the limitations of paywalls than to set up their own open access, diamond, peer-reviewed journal? And of course, this area is only going to get stronger. We're not going away. And as anybody who knows me, Jane and I in particular, we're not going anywhere. We really want to push this diamond away. And one of the great things at the moment, sorry, I think I went too far there, is Science Europe has just published recently in the last year or two their action plan for diamond open access publishing, and this is a Europe-wide initiative, and they're going to increase quality, capacity, sustainability. This is going nowhere. And Craft OA is actually developing a search engine just for diamond open access published content. And I think that will be a search engine that Dave mentioned that is not, the search engine, the crappy search engines that are out there, this is going to be a great search engine. So I'm going to hand you back to Jane, and we're just going to wrap up now.
So we've already plugged the library publishing curriculum from the library curriculum from the Library Publishing Coalition, but there's also a free course by PKP, that's the Public Knowledge Project. It's got 4 different modules that you can work your way through as well. OASPA also has a toolkit, as well as JISC. So JISC has one, and that covers open monograph publishing as well. This is a fantastic resource. It's Charles W. Bailey Jr.'s scholarly publishing bibliography. It's got about 300 annotated sources in there, and the website has kind of live links. It's really worth going into that. Marie and I are still involved with Open Access Publishing. We're currently on the executive board of the All Ireland Journal of Higher Education, ISHJ, and as we've said, we're planning to launch a journal ourselves. And this is something that it's just kind of bringing it back to how Marie opened, really, and it's about the Sustainable Development Goals, that there's the SDG Publishers Compact, and that library publishers and all kinds of diamond open access publishers really should sign up, because everything we do really should be underlined by a vision to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm just going to leave you with a quote from the article that Marie mentioned earlier, and it's, "Without bibliodiversity, we risk overlooking important scientific discoveries and innovations that may save humanity one day, no less." Without bibliodiversity, we're restricting our imaginations and limiting ourselves to the understanding constructed by a minority of prestigious publications and publishers. So, for example, consider the mRNA vaccines, which have been instrumental in combating COVID-19, the pandemic. Catalina Carico's work on mRNA is now recognised as a complete game changer, and it was rejected for publication in Science and Nature. So there's our references, and thank you all for your attention. Thank you.